Okay, so here we're going to talk about the rise of Hitler and the National Socialist Party in Germany. And this first part is going to look at Hitler himself, and subsequent will look at Nazism and ideology and the growth for support of the party within German society. And our learning outcomes are myriad because this video is 1,000 years long. There are 10 parts. You're welcome. I'm just kidding. They're 8. So the learning outcomes, one, you need to review the factors contributing to the rise of Hitler from the previous units. That means from stuff discussed last year in terms of the results of World War I and international relations during this period. You need to understand the rise of Hitler and Nazism, understand Hitler's ideology, and this is important because we're going to use it to analyze the policies followed later on, and then also understand the mechanisms used by the NSDAP to come to power, which will again help us to understand when the final seizure of power happens, how and why did that happen. I know you don't want to, but you gotta do a little review. So basically, we've spoken quite a lot about all of this stuff in terms of the Weimar Republic, in terms of the results of World War I, the peace treaties, the whole international situation, economic situation. So consider the political, social, and economic factors that contributed to the rise of the NSDAP politically and Nazism ideologically. So one of the reasons why I ask you to keep considering this is, of course, bringing us closer to the exam to just kind of have the information more ready in your brain as you review it. You know it better, right? And it allows you to be able to answer the question from a number of different viewpoints. The other thing that I want you to consider is, one, we have a political party. That is the National Socialistic DAP. And then we also have Nazism as an ideology. And it's kind of like more of a social movement. And the political party is the political arm that kind of attempts to have the movement's ideology represented in the political arena. Which brings us to some information about Hitler and kind of getting some background information to further understand why and how the ideology developed as it did, and then, of course, the policies that he will implement. As you know, he was born in Austria in 1889. His parents were about like middle class. And his goal was to become an architect, but he was rejected by the Academy of Fine Arts. And basically, for the next few years, he lived in Vienna, supporting himself with odd jobs. And essentially, he was influenced by a number of the anti-Semitic and nationalist writings of the time, and he gave reasons, or he explained why he couldn't progress in the field that he wanted to because of racial groups having too much influence in Vienna. So he leaves Vienna and moves to Munich, where he feels like he will have a better chance, right? And so this is when you see, in a way, the development of his basic understanding and perspectives on race and nationalism that are later going to be expanded upon in Mein Kampf. And his nationalism differed from Franco and Mussolini, right? So we've spoken about Franco in Spain, and we've spoken about Mussolini and this nationalism, which was really about, for those two guys, the nationalism was very much about unifying the country, returning to this sort of more traditional and perfect, well, maybe not perfect, but more traditional and better society. and also the idea of everybody having their place in society and everybody contributing to making society good or great. And so that's one of the basic features of nationalism. But his branches away from that because it becomes very much based on race. So it's not just about unifying his nation and having a state for his nation, but it's also about what constitutes very much, or what constitutes that nation is not the shared background, but also this idea of race. And so this is Hungarians were superior to others in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Oops. Germans were superior to others in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And one of the things to note is that the Austro-Hungarian Empire was massively multicultural. In some ways, more multicultural than some of the other states in Europe at the time, in many ways, more so. And he resented the wealth of the Jewish businessmen in Vienna. And that was the reason why he saw his country the way it was. He saw this sort of like decadence and, in a way, the Austro-Hungarian Empire losing its greatness, and he blamed that loss of awesomeness on the minority populations. And many socialists and communists were Jews. So a lot of the people who populated the left were of this ethnic group that he hated anyway. And so, but the reason why that is the case, or one of the reasons why that's the case, in Jews living in Europe for centuries, the entire time that they lived in Europe, had experienced anti-Semitism. And so, they were often not allowed to participate in the larger society, or they're relegated to certain portions of the city, so on and so forth. They didn't have the same civil rights that other groups in the country did. And when you look at socialism and communism, one of the things that they do is they actually don't pay attention to, and they break down and they invalidate all of those sort of like traditional ways of thinking that marginalize people. They all, both socialism and communism, kind of have this idea of everybody being equal. And for a number of Jews, socialism and communism made sense because, and they advocated it because it meant that they would have more equal treatment in society. And the other thing is this idea of social Darwinism. So he believed that, and this wasn't just a Hitler belief. This is a belief that was very common in a lot of European societies at the time. That this survival of the fittest would apply to societies and kind of like to macro groups, right? So we have more fit races, and the more fit races should be dominant in society. And so he believed and identified with this pan-German nationalism, this idea of a greater German state. This is why he considers his regime the Third Reich, so kind of hearkening back to the glory days of the Holy Roman Empire, which covered a massive chunk of Central Europe and parts of Southern Europe as well. And so a state, so that's part of the nationalism, right, is that it doesn't matter whether you're from the state of Germany or you're from the state of Austria, but you guys are all German, so there should be a state for the Germans. And that they are united by this shared language and culture. And so because he believed less in Austria-Hungary, he escapes the draft or conscription in Austria-Hungary and goes to Germany and signs up and fights in World War I. So fighting in World War I helped to intensify his German nationalism. Part of it is in the inherent conservative nature of the military. Part of it is what they're fighting for, and part of it, of course, his beliefs, and also the kind of the indoctrination that happens in the military. And he was devastated by the German surrender in World War I because part of the propaganda that the military sent out was that they were winning. They were always winning. And he believed that Germany had been betrayed by the communists and social democrats. He was a big proponent of the stabbed in the back myth for two reasons, right? One, it certainly helped to rally people to his side, and it was a good piece of propaganda to antagonize people against the Weimar Republic. And two, he genuinely believed that this is what happened. And of course, as we said, a lot of communists were Jews, and he felt that the communists and Jews and social democrats and socialists, Marxists, everybody was part of the November Revolution. And so these were the November Revolution criminals that he's essentially going to later work against. And he was very angered by the Treaty of Versailles, and he wanted to enter politics and build a new Germany that would reclaim her rightful position. So basically, the Treaty of Versailles radicalized him and gave him the impetus to become involved politically.